So we've heard from two fantastic speakers so far. First, we heard from someone who is a student and a gamer at CCNY. We heard from someone in the New York City gaming industry. Now we're going to hear from a gaming academic. Those are the different perspectives we've been trying to bring into our Well Played, and I'm super excited to introduce to you all now Nick Fortuno, who's been talking about games as a gateway to college. I'm going to say a few words about Nick first. This is a well-played series. When I think about someone who's well-played, the first person who comes to mind is Nick Fortuno. There's no one I know who knows more games and game mechanics, analog and digital, than he. I've known him since, I think, 2004. Around that time, he was a game lead on a game you might know, Diner Dash, right? We designed games together with high school students in New York City and later at the American Museum of Natural History. He is the director of the Game Design and Development Program at LIU. He knows a lot. He's done a lot. I think we're all going to be excited to hear what he has to share with us today. Nick, please come up and present to us. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I think there's kind of two things I want to talk about really quickly, because I think it's like we're here in this like really beautiful room in this really beautiful campus, and we're talking about esports. And I don't know if that strikes anybody else as weird, but it strikes me as weird, right? At least the way I grew up and the way people talked about games with me. And if, you know, like in this context of talking to people who play games and do esports, Barry comes up and says, Nick is the most knowledgeable person about games that I know. That's not something that I necessarily got a lot of love or praise or respect for growing up, and certainly not from adults in my life, right? And I'm sure you know that because I'm sure people have told you that too, right? Like I'm sure you've heard things like, why shouldn't you play games? Like what do you hear about why you shouldn't play games? Addictive, what else? Waste of time, what else? Rot your brain, that's a good one. Hold that thought. Waste of time. Waste of time, yeah. Makes you violent, makes you believe in fantasy, right? You can't tell the difference between the real world and the fake world. You spend all your time indoors. All sound familiar? Right, so yes, we say that about games. But what I find really fascinating is that like I can read you like, and I have them right in front of me, like quotes from the 18th century that are exactly the same about novels. Yeah, novels, I'll just give you one. The minds of novel readers are intoxicated, their rest is broken, their health is shattered, and their prospect of usefulness is blighted. It's a direct quote. Childishness in boys, even of good ability, seems to be a growing fault, and I do not know what to ascribe it to except the great number of exciting books for amusement that leave boys totally pale, meaning like their skin has no color because they've been inside all day. Not only for regular work, but for literature of all sorts. I've seen a young lady with her table loaded with volumes of fictitious trash, pouring day after day, night after night over highly wrought scenes and successfully portrayed pictures of romance until her cheeks grew pale, her eyes became wild and restless, and her mind wandered and was lost. She was insane, incurably sane, but from reading novels. Right? So when you hear that stuff, it's nothing new. In fact, it's so not new that I can point to a name at the center of the board, right? Socrates. Do you know Socrates died? Yeah. Yeah, do you know what he was actually accused of? Do you know what the crime was that Socrates was accused of that got him killed? I'm sorry, not for reading, no. Although Socrates is kind of bad on reading, actually. Like he didn't like reading so much. He thought people should memorize things, at least according to Plato. He was killed for corrupting the youth. Right? So this idea that mediums that we participate with, that like activities that younger people do, that the communities of younger people involved in things that like interest them and challenge them and bond them is something that rots their brain, right? I think that's like a powerful message that just gets drumbeat with whatever the new thing is that comes along, right? So you should know that you're not alone in doing that and getting that kind of criticism. You're not alone in hearing about that. And I think the novel example is super interesting because now if older family members of yours saw you reading novels, they would jump for joy at like the fact that you're spending your time doing something valuable. And we can only think that games will be that in 150 years because we will have something else that will be rotting the brains of our children and grandchildren. There will be something else that's wasting their time and keeping them away from the things that they should be doing. There will be something else that corrupts them, right? And why I like being here, like in this room, like with these names behind me, and like with the kind of company we keep, is that we're in an institution of learning talking about games, right? And I think that's amazing because games are not just the negative things that we say about them. Games have all of these positive things too. Now, Asi talked about some of those things, and we've been talking about some of those things, like in terms of like how these communities can be inclusive, or how games can challenge particular issues, or how games can bring people together. But I want to talk about why that's valuable to college specifically, right? Like, and why are we talking about esports in college? And why do colleges even have esports at all? And I think that part of the reason, well, there's kind of two big reasons, but part of the reason why is this question of how esports are sports, right? What does it mean that an esport is a sport? How is playing League of Legends like playing a sport? Yeah. Yeah, so it involves training, right? So we think about sports as things that involve, like you practice and you get better at. What else? Yeah. Strategy, right? Like when you play, you have to think, and you have to, like, you're putting together a team and you're working together on that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah, it's a pathway to a kind of profession, right? Like if you achieve in it, you can like go to competitions, you can like be part of those worlds, and you can even do it professionally if you're successful enough. There's another thing though that I think is really interesting, and that is sort of underlying sports. Because when we talk about sports at college, we often think about like big sports at college, right? We think about like big basketball at college, right? We think about big American football at college, right? These things that draw like crowds and money and stuff. But there's a whole other part of that, which is like people playing together on campus, right? Like just this idea that like you play on an esports team, like you're playing League with people or Overwatch with people or even Smash with people. And like you hang out in the room training together, which is just time, right? And how many of you have just kind of stumbled into the spaces where you play these games, whether it's like an online search for players, or you go to an esports lounge where you can play with people, and you meet people, right? And you bond with people in those contexts, right? These people become friends. These people become teammates. You strategize with them, and you build that kind of like social relationship. And colleges recognize that. Right? Like colleges see that people do that, and especially for people coming in to college for the first time, it becomes this really amazing way for people to make friends and connect and find community, right? Sports has done that traditionally, but sports is not for everyone, right? Not everyone is going to compete in those kind of activities. So what esports does is it gives us that ability. But I want to talk about that for another second because it's a really important part of what games are, right? There's a lot of what we talked about, like a lot of this discussion has been about people playing together, right? Whether it's like how they communicate online or like what it means for them to connect online. But there's a whole philosophy of games around just what it is like to play with other people. Have you ever played that game when you were a little kid where you have a big parachute and they throw the parachute up and then you have to run under it? You know what game I'm talking about? Okay, so that game was designed by a game designer and theorist named Bernie DeKoven. And DeKoven, who passed away, how many years ago? 3 years ago, very recently, like rest in peace, was the proponent of a whole school of games that was thinking about questions like that was called the New Games movement. And it was involved thinking about games as an activity that people did together for a reason. And he, in a book called The Playful Path, which is a really wonderful book if you're interested in this and you want to just like go to everyone who hates that you play games and throw something in their face that will shut them up, is the idea that just by playing a game together, you connect. This is a concept that he calls co-liberation, right? So to co-liberate, right? So the means like together, right? To cooperate, right? So you play the parachute game and you're going to run and you got to sort of track where everybody is. And you all have to kind of be in sequence together to get through the parachute together. You play an esports game together and you strategize, right? Like you've got to be together with your team. And in a game that's really intense around that, like League, you have to be synced with your team. And so everybody in that system is playing at the same time, thinking together, coordinating together, working together, right? And it's an excuse to do that, right? It's an excuse to spend a half an hour with 6 or 7 people just like working together. And what DeKoven points out is that there's something really freeing about that, right? There's something like wonderful about just the idea that like, I'm just gonna be in this space with you for half an hour and we're just gonna do this thing together. You saw it in the video, right? Oh, we might be having a good day or a bad day, but we go into the game and we know we're gonna have a good time, right? And we know we're gonna have a good time because we're gonna be with people we care about doing a thing together. And that can be competitive, or that can be collaborative, that can be hard or casual, that can be long or quick, right? But what we end up doing is we all engage in a system at the same time. And that leads us to bond. And that leads us to connect in ways that we might not in other contexts. I run a festival with a few other people that I've run for the past 16 years. COVID was not friendly to it, but we're going to be coming back, called Come Out and Play, right? And Come Out and Play, we just run games in public, right? Just like new games in public. Real dumb, simple games, you know, like games with like lots of dodgeballs or pool noodles or like, you know, like you just run around the streets tagging each other, stuff like that. Why do we run this thing? We can get like a couple thousand people out to one of those festivals, right? Because it's free and like people will just show up and play games. But what happens when you play games with a stranger? Well, it's hard to meet strangers, right? It's like hard to talk to people you don't know. It's kind of awkward. You know what makes it not awkward? Having something to do. You know what makes it really not awkward? Having something stupid to do, right? Because no one's gonna be precious or pretentious about doing something stupid. If I run up to you and I'm like, hold this pool noodle with me while we run across like this street and make sure we don't drop the ball that's resting on the top of the pool noodle, and nobody's taking that seriously, right? We're just gonna be silly and laugh together while we do it. And that kind of magic that I can just make a thing that's just makes you bond with someone you don't know. In a safe way, right? In a casual way where it doesn't have to be super serious. There's a kind of magic to that. And we know from research, which I won't bore you with, but you can go look this up on your own, that those kinds of connections are what get people through college, right? Having people you trust and care about with you, helping you, working with you, right? And games build that. They build it automatically, actually. And so, you know, we want to teach you games because, like, games is a job. That's cool. We want to teach you games because games are an art form, and it's a really cutting-edge art form. And as people pointed out, they're like changing all the time. And you know, like, there's a lot of opportunity for you, meaning you, to make something new if you wanted to do that. But also, they're a chance for you to meet people and connect with people and have a safe way of just being part of a community, right? And if nothing else, there's a level of a college which is a community, right? It's bringing you into communities of thinkers, communities of learners, communities of practitioners, and games are a vehicle to do that. So I would say that like esports, in some ways, is a great preparation for college, right? Because now you have an angle to connect with the people around you through something that trains you, something that disciplines you, something that gives you an excuse to spend time connecting to other people. That's something that I think colleges value. And so it makes me happy to be here just to talk about esports, just because like it's an angle for people to connect in a place that's meant to connect them. Thank you.